food chain illustrates the feeding relationships and transfer of energy between organisms in a specific place. The reason it is called a food chain is because each organism is linked to the other, as in a chain. The feeding relationships that we just discussed form a food chain that looks like this, with phytoplankton being eaten by a nymph, which is also eaten by a trout, which is then eaten by a heron. Organisms in a food chain are either producers or consumers. Phytoplankton is a producer, with the other organisms being consumers. Each level in a food chain is called a trophic level. Trophic comes from the Greek word trophikos, for nourishment or food. These are numbered first, second, third, and fourth trophic level. As one organism eats another in a food chain, matter is transferred, meaning that the matter or mass of an organism is eaten by the next organism. When we eat something, we are taking in matter and energy. We need energy to move and carry out body functions. The food chain demonstrates the transfer of energy. But food chains rarely exist in nature as isolated single chains by themselves, because many animals in an ecosystem, like crows, eat more than just one kind of food. For example, one such animal left this, its feces, or scat, that came from a black bear. We can learn a lot about animals by looking at their scat. If you look closely, you can see seeds, and we know that this black bear was eating apples. Bears eat both fruits, such as apples, and rodents, such as this squirrel. They are both herbivores and carnivores. Omnivores are animals that eat both plants and animals. Picture that these raspberries were eaten by a small bird, which in turn was eaten by a snake, which was eventually eaten by this great blue heron. It might also be possible for the bear to eat the berries or snakes. And suppose that this squirrel could serve as food to a bear or a snake, or it could also eat the berries. As you can see, our simple food chain quickly becomes a tangled web. We call this a food web. A food web is a much more realistic representation of what actually occurs in nature and represents many intermeshed food chains. Another very important player in food webs are decomposers. Decomposers consist of fungi, worms, bacteria, molds, and any creature which helps break down dead organisms. They are constantly at work, as is this mold on a piece of bread. When you walk through the forest, you don't see towering piles of dead trees and animals. That is because decomposers break them down. These logs in the White River are decomposing at this very moment. And household scraps and yard trimmings are being broken down in this compost pile. Adding decomposers to our food web, we can see that everything is eventually broken down by decomposers. Decomposers, like these worms, recycle nutrients from dead organisms, allowing living ones to flourish. We can rearrange this food web with producers at the bottom and then consumers further up. Not only are helpful things like nutrients passed from organism to organism, but so is energy. When one organism eats another organism, energy, or food, is transferred. When energy is transferred from one organism to another, a great deal of it is lost, or given off in the form of heat. In fact, in many cases, nearly 90% of the energy is lost in the form of heat, as is seen along this food chain. This concept of energy loss can also be illustrated in a type of pyramid called an energy pyramid. An energy pyramid compares the energy available at each level of the food chain. Notice with each successive feeding level that the amount of energy decreases greatly, so that as one organism eats another, less energy is available at the top of the pyramid. By studying food chains and webs, we can also learn about something called biomass. Biomass is the mass or weight of an organism and its parts, such as these leaves. For example, this nymph weighs a fraction of a gram. If we were to catch all the nymphs in this stream and other microscopic food sources, their biomass would be greater than the biomass of all the trout. We can view biomass in this biomass pyramid, where you can see that the total amount of biomass decreases as you go up the pyramid. In most healthy ecosystems, the biomass of the producers, or plants, is far greater than the biomass of the consumers. While energy flows through ecosystems, matter is recycled. Water, carbon, oxygen, nitrogen, and other chemicals needed for life are recycled continually. These materials come from waste materials in dead organisms. They are broken down and made useful to living organisms by decomposers. For example, these trees are absorbing the nutrients from once previously living plants and animals. It's a type of natural fertilizer. Contaminants, such as pesticides, can also be passed along the food chain. They can be harmful to animals and humans. Biomagnification is the term used to describe the process of contaminants being passed along the food chain and becoming concentrated in animals higher up the food chain. The process of biomagnification was brought to the public's attention by Rachel Carson in a book titled Silent Spring, in which he described how the harmful chemical DDT was passed along the food chain and caused the eggshells of eagles and other birds to become thin, not allowing young to develop properly. This caused certain bird populations, especially hawks, eagles, and falcons, to plummet. The eventual banning of DDT and other harmful pesticides has reduced these toxins in the food web and allowed populations of these birds at the top of the food web to rebound. Along the White River, the food chain was drastically altered by early settlers, disrupting the flow of the river over 200 years ago. Large dams, built for water power to run mills, prevented migrating salmon going from the Atlantic Ocean upstream along the Connecticut River into the White River. Serving as a food source for people, eagles, bears, and many other animals, these salmon all but disappeared from these waters.